everyone, and welcome to Tuesday Talks. I'm Seema Kumar, I'm the CEO of Cure, and today we bring you an extraordinary new innovation that is game-changing and changing the way that we think about treating chronic illnesses. Joining me today is Dr. Kevin Tracey. He's an inventor, researcher, and president and CEO of Feinstein Institute for Biomedical Research, which is a research arm of Northwell Health. Kevin, welcome to Cure, and I'm just so blown away by your talk, and I've heard you 2 times now, and it's remarkable, this new transformational way of thinking about treating diseases, especially chronic diseases that plague us for so many people around the world. This new treatment, which is really a device, a computer chip, is going to transform the way we think about chronic diseases. So tell us a little bit more about that.
It is an exciting time in this story, Seema. Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm thrilled to be speaking with you about this. So my colleagues and I discovered some years ago that the your brain can turn off inflammation in your body. And that simple concept now has led to the possibility to target this off switch, this brain to inflammation off switch, by implanting computer chips that stimulate the vagus nerve in your neck. So you have 2 vagus nerves, like 2 thumbs, one on each side, and they travel up and down the vagus nerve of your neck. And there's thousands and thousands of fibers in each of these, but my colleagues and I discovered there's a critically important group of nerve fibers in your neck that turn off inflammation, and that we could control those fibers with a computer chip. We've now done this in laboratory experiments dating back for more than 25 years, and most recently in clinical trials where driving electrical signals through the vagus nerve prevents inflammation in patients.
So is this kind of a one and done kind of an approach? So you put the chip in, and then the chip actually controls the vagus nerve, so it stops the inflammation, and you're set for life. You don't have to take any drugs. Is that how it works? And does it work for everybody?
Some patients are able to stop taking their other drugs and to have remission from their condition, whether the condition is rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease. We've seen patients whose now only treatment for those conditions is a computer chip in their neck, a nerve stimulator in their neck. Some patients don't respond, like in everything else in medicine. You see good responses to some therapies and less good or no response to the same therapy in other patients. And a third group of patients actually now have better clinical responses when they combine their drug therapies with their computer chip therapies. And I think that this is probably going to hold up as in the future. We're early in this, and we need to do many more patients, but the early results are really striking and really important.
So when you say early, at what stage is it? How many patients have you tried it on? And what are the results, and is it in clinical trials now?
The results are from clinical trials that were initially performed in Europe, in rheumatoid arthritis and in Crohn's disease. More recently, the latest announcement from Setpoint Medical is that a clinical trial in the U.S. in rheumatoid arthritis patients, 242, I believe, rheumatoid arthritis patients, treated in 30 different medical centers across the United States. That trial hit its primary endpoint. It is hoped that this will lead to the approval by the FDA in the coming months for using this therapy to treat patients with debilitating rheumatoid arthritis in the United States. That will be a tipping point for this story that, as I said, has a 25-year history, but where we are today could accelerate the testing of this idea in multiple sclerosis and in other inflammatory conditions.
That's extraordinary. And so, and how was it to work with the FDA on this? Because this is like so it's a chip, right? And the chip is administering a drug. Is that what it is? Is it a chip? It's a medical device and a drug combined?
There's no drug in the device. The device delivers electric current to the vagus nerve. The FDA has been great to work with in this development. I'm not part of Setpoint Medical. I'm a co-founder, but I'm not at the company, so you'll have to ask the company about the specifics. But the FDA did give this program breakthrough designation, which has been a great asset to the development timeline and to the anticipated future use. And they recently announced, the FDA recently announced that the plans for Setpoint Medical to do clinical trials in multiple sclerosis have also been given a breakthrough designation. So that's very important.
That's 2 indications now,
Yes.
rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis.
Correct.
That's exciting.
Very exciting.
And they're 2 very different diseases, but what's common in both of them is inflammation, right? And in fact, inflammation underlies so many of the diseases, chronic diseases that we all suffer from. Is that correct?
Correct. We are living in an era now where inflammation is a contributing factor or the cause of some of the most important unsolved diseases of our time. You know, if you look at the WHO data, 40 million people die every year. Out of the 60 million people who die on Earth every year, 40 million die of cancer, heart disease, and stroke, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, which are neurodegenerative conditions, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and obesity. So those are the major killers of our time.
Yeah.
And what they have in common is that inflammation either causes or makes these conditions worse. And so as a scientist,
Yep.
as an inventor, the question I ask is, if we could really understand and stop inflammation in those conditions, what would outcomes be? Would we cure some of those cancers? Would we prevent the progression of heart disease in some of these patients? And most importantly, would we extend health span? Would people live
Longer, healthier.
healthy?
Yes, that's just extraordinary. So, you know, and when did you realize that you could actually reset, for lack of a better word, the inflammation, and that it had to do with the vagus nerve? When did you realize this?
There were 2 realizations that occurred in answering your question. The first was in the laboratory when we noticed that putting a particular molecule in the brain of mice and rats stopped inflammation in the body of those animals. And by eliminating other explanations, we discovered that the vagus nerve, by cutting the vagus nerve, that effect was lost. And then, of course, that led to the obvious next experiment of, rather than cut it, if you electrically stimulate the vagus nerve, does that stop inflammation in those animals? And it did. So that was the fundamental discovery, because once we realized that electrical signals in the vagus nerve stop inflammation, I wrote on the back of a napkin, if we do this in people and stop the production of cytokines like TNF and IL-1, we should be able to treat diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease. And so that was the first. And the second reality, was when I met the first patient.
Yeah.
And I flew to Mostar, Bosnia, where in the Dinaric Alps, in the mountains of Bosnia, I met a patient whose name is Pero, and he told me he'd been homebound on his couch for 8 years, crippled with rheumatoid arthritis, taking steroids and methotrexate. That's all they had for him there back in 2011. Yeah. And he was the first patient ever treated with a vagus nerve stimulator for
and
this
how's
condition.
he doing? Yeah.
So I spoke to his doctor a few months ago in the course of writing my book about this whole story called The Great Nerve. And I spoke to his doctor, and his doctor tells me he's has no signs and symptoms of the disease, and he's taking no medications. So his only therapy now 13 years later is the vagus nerve implant that was put in on Labor Day 2011.
Wow.
And he's driving a truck, he's working full time, he's playing tennis with his kids, and so...
Amazing.
It is amazing.
Amazing.
I mean, every time I think of it, I smile.
And you wrote this in a napkin? In a paper napkin?
I wrote on the back of a napkin.
The eureka moment. I mean, this is what like storybooks are made out of.
We don't say eureka anymore. We say holy shit.
Holy shit.
As this was happening in like 1998, I went to lunch down the street from the Feinstein Institute with the chairman of the board, Ralph Nappi. And Ralph said, "What are you doing in the lab?" And I told him this story, and he said, "How does it work?" And so I took a napkin off of the
lunch
table, and I drew a brain, and I drew a vagus nerve, and I drew a spleen, and I drew a battery with electricity going up and down, and that was the start of all this.
What did he say when you drew that? And
he said, "You should start a company and do clinical trials." So that's what we did.
That's great. That's excellent. What a story. What a story. And now this is, that was 2011 is when the patient got the first patient got the implant. And now all this time later, you're in clinical trials and potentially, with, looking at approvals. So this is an invasive procedure. Is it an invasive procedure? How is it done?
So the surgery is done. It's an outpatient procedure. So it's probably, give or take, a half an hour. Go into an outpatient facility. It's done by making a small 1.5-inch incision in the left neck. The computer chip, I call it, or the vagus nerve stimulator, is about the size of a Tylenol capsule. That's placed next to the carotid artery where you feel your pulse in your neck on the vagus nerve, and then a couple stitches and you go home that afternoon. Your doctor will control the activity of that nerve stimulator through a tablet, through an iPad in her office. The idea will be that the settings will be adjusted every 6 or 8 weeks. And this is based on talking to patients and physicians. They like to see each other for chronic conditions every 6 or 8 weeks. You make adjustments to therapy, and that's exactly what will happen through the iPad. Rather than writing a prescription pad or calling a pharmacy, the doctor will adjust the settings on the iPad. What we see right now is just a minute or so a day is sufficient to alleviate the symptoms in most patients. And going forward, as experience with this grows, we'll learn more about adjusting it for other settings.
That's extraordinary. I mean, can you imagine a day when it can actually, not the iPad, but your Apple Watch or some device, a wearable device, you could actually control it yourself?
Probably not through your wrist. Control the implant yourself through a wearable.
Through a wearable.
Yes and no. I mean, it's going to depend on the seriousness of the condition.
Yeah.
Right. So people with serious conditions. I mean, some of these poor patients with rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, they're in and out of wheelchairs. They're in and out of the operating rooms for major surgeries. They're very sick. They spend time in hospitals and they spend time disabled. So it's a you're not gonna fool around with self-therapy for some conditions.
Yeah.
I do see a time where devices will continue to evolve, and they for other less serious conditions that they may be controllable through wearables. I don't think it's fair to divide the world into a question of is surgery required or is surgery not required. It's much more complicated than that.
Yep.
I mean, the risks of surgery are very, very small.
Yep.
They're very well understood.
Yep.
And in patients who currently are either having no relief from expensive, dangerous medications with serious side effects, especially medications that are also invasive, they have to be injected. The trade-off for them isn't surgery versus non-surgery. It's relief from your condition for a one-day inconvenience of an outpatient surgery and then a lifetime of therapy versus the current state of affairs. So this will evolve, and it will be driven by the patients.
Yep.
What they need and what they want. It won't be driven by the companies.
Yes, and it's so as you said, it's an outpatient procedure.
Absolutely.
Right, and my husband got a hip replacement, and before that he was walking with a cane. He was in horrible pain. He got a hip replacement. The next day he was up and standing and walking, and now he loves to dance. So he dances all the time. Any party we go to, he dances. And so, surgery is not always bad.
Well, when you're talking about a hip replacement, which is about this big,
versus
this, a Tylenol capsule under the skin of your neck in 30 minutes, no comparison.
No comparison, yes.
But you bring up an important point, and this is, again, it's often overlooked. There are millions and millions of people walking around already on the planet Earth with implants.
Yeah.
Millions of people have brain implants. Millions of people have joint implants.
Pacemakers.
Cardiac implants, valves, stents in their aorta and in their coronary arteries. The list goes on and on and on. If you're debilitated by an inflammatory condition or at risk of death from an inflammatory condition, and the question is, do I want to take my chances with the current state of affairs and expensive drugs with side effects, or do I want to try a 30-minute outpatient procedure? I know what I'd sign up for.
Yep. And so what's next?
What's next? What I am focused on right now with my colleagues is two things. First, our lab is going gangbusters on looking at the next things, and I can't tell you about those now. But things are going things are going really well in the lab. The second thing I'm putting a lot of time and effort into is mobilizing patient understanding and physician understanding of what you now understand better than most patients and physicians.
Yes.
And the reason is that patients and physicians will drive the adoption of truly new things. In the history of medicine, there's very few truly different innovations. And this is truly different. And so it's going to require people to think differently. It's going to require reimbursement to be different. It's going to require hospital and medical practice operations to be different, workflow streams to change. It's going to require a lot of changes. And so right now I'm working very hard to try to actually shorten that adoption, because I want to see patients have access to this as soon as possible, because I think it's going to help millions of people.
It's going to help millions of people, and you've written a book about it.
Yes, I have. It's in production now. Hopefully it will be out in May of 2025. It's called The Great Nerve.
Excellent. And so May of 2025, we'll look for it. Final question. What does the word cure mean to you?
You know, that's a great question. And I almost never say that in response to a question. The word cure is a word that doctors don't use, or they tend almost never to use. But when I see patients today who've spent, sometimes half of their adult life on powerful medications that did not alleviate their symptoms, and they're now walking around with a computer chip in their neck, taking no medications and having no symptoms and living a normal, full life, that's my new definition of cure.
Extraordinary. And if a healthy patient were to use this down the road, could you extend lifespan so you can remain healthy and extend your lifespan? That's
one of our secret lab projects.
Yes, that's great. Longevity.
Longevity.
That's fantastic. That's really fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and really appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is wonderful.
It's a
really
pleasure
wonderful.
talking to you. Thank you.
Very, very, very exciting.